Welcome to Innovation Out of Failure, where we talk to people about their careers and, most importantly, about the challenges they have faced that actually end up making them more successful innovators in the end. I am Andrew Lyon, Dean of the Fowler School of Engineering at Chapman University, and I'm your host for this series. This week, we're speaking with someone who most people know simply as Joe K. Joe has been at the center of the SoCal surf scene since its earliest days and contributed to many of the innovations that have shaped that sport and the culture that surrounds it. All right, welcome to Innovation Out of Failure. Today we are joined by Joe Knoernschild. Joe, thanks for joining us. How are you today?
I'm good. Thanks for asking. Beautiful day here in Palos Verdes.
I think it's always beautiful up there. I've never driven through there when it's not been beautiful.
The land that time forgotten, LA, but it's not LA.
Yeah, exactly. So you actually grew up in LA. You're a native, right? You grew up, I guess, just north of Wood. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah, I was born in downtown Los Angeles, St. Vincent's, Third and Alvarado, so LA local.
Excellent. Um, so, I've given you a little bit of a preamble about what this is all about. We talk about innovation. We talk about all the things that drive people in their careers. I was fascinated reading your bio, that you actually started off as a teacher, right? So just post graduation, you were teaching in the public school system, and then things changed dramatically in terms of where you took your career. So maybe for the benefit of the students, you could give us a little bit of a rundown of how all that went.
Sure. The trajectory, it's been it's embarrassing to say, but it's always been driven by a love of the ocean. And teaching was a natural choice because, you think, gee, you have the summers off and I can surf all summer. And both my parents were teachers, but little do you know that you don't make a whole lot of money, teaching. And so I always had to have other jobs. And so this grand plan of like being a teacher and being able to be in the water was sort of waylaid by having to be a waiter and to export surfboards to Japan, and then managing Bob Hurley's surf shop, International Pro Designs. And so you have a lot of irons in the fire, but it was, pretty much guided by, trying to, maximize my water time. My wife, poor wife Cindy, has put up with this for since 1972. That makes me an old guy. But, we had a young family and you do what you have to do.
So, so that love of the ocean, grew into kind of the next stage of your career where, I guess the way the story's been told to me is you and a lot of your friends and partners were really responsible for bringing the Billabong brand here, and then after that, working with Hurley to launch that brand. So, could you talk a little bit about how that started and what that process looked like?
Sure. In the process of exporting surfboards to Japan, there were a number of surfboard shapers that I was working with down in Orange County, and Bob Hurley was one of them. And Bob asked me if I had spare time to manage a surf shop, and we wanted to sell clothing because surfboards have a very low profit margin. And so the boards are for show and the clothes are for go, which is the axiom in the industry, which means that, gee, the profit margin, is in the clothes. And so at that time, Quicksilver just launched, and they were an Australian brand. And I had friends that launched Quicksilver in Newport Beach, and we thought it was a slam dunk to sell Quicksilver in our surf shop. But Quicksilver turned us down. It was my first exposure to politics in the surf industry, my first failure. I'm thinking, gee, relationships matter, and they do. Don't get me wrong, but business is business. And so Bob asked me to contact Billabong in Australia. I did. Long and the short of it is they didn't have a license in the United States, and they asked if we would be the license for North America. So by the grace of God, it fell into our lap. It's a matter of being in the right place at the right time. And so we launched that in 1983, went to our first trade show having no idea what we were getting into. We raised about $45,000 in capital, to finance our inventory buy. We went to our first trade show, and it resulted in $1 million worth of orders, and we only had 45,000. And so again, by the grace of God, Billabong Australia had been in business for 10 years, and they said, gee, we kind of expected this was going to happen. We'll finance your inventory buy, gave us net 90, and away we went. And so it was, again, a matter of being in the right place at the right time. There's a lot of truth to that axiom. It's a lot better to be lucky than smart.
But I mean, those are difficult, no pun intended. Those are difficult waters to navigate, right? As you said, this was an industry that was really on the upswing, at least domestically. There were a lot of politics associated with that, and so that initial foray into this with Billabong, I guess that then got the creative juices flowing in terms of how you might do a new brand, correct?
Well, the new brand, Hurley, it was a result of after 16 years of working with Billabong, and it was based out of Burleigh Heads in Queensland, Australia. And the population in Australia, 90% live within 10 miles of the ocean. And so they're very, very ocean-minded. And so Billabong, from the very, very get-go, was extremely hardcore surf. And the owner, Gordon Merchant, was a surfboard shaper as well, and that's why Bob Hurley and Gordon Merchant bonded. But as time went on, after we picked up the license, when we first picked up the license, all things Australian, all things surfing were incredibly popular in culture in the United States. There was Crocodile Dundee, on the radio. There was Midnight Oil, Men at Work. We had a great rivalry going on in a team rider that we sponsored. Mark Occhilupo was head-to-head with Tom Curran, and that was getting tons of press in the surf media. And then the secondary and tertiary markets caught on, and that meant like the mid-tier retailers such as the Buckle and Tilly's and PacSun turned in orders for us. And we were thinking, gee, we're just a small little surf company, but all of a sudden we were getting, huge orders. And then Macy's, came on board, and Bloomingdale's. And, I remember being at trade shows and the surf shop owners were getting mad at us saying, I thought you guys were hardcore surf, why are you selling out? And, it's sort of hard when you have these giant purchase orders being dangled in front of you, and you have this workforce that you're hiring to turn down orders. And so we started to embrace things outside of surfing, such as skateboarding, and sponsoring skateboarders like Bob Burnquist out of Brazil, who was gaining lots of media attention. Then we started working with MTV, which was in their infancy, and one of the bands was getting tons and tons of, airplay, on. I can remember being in Korea, channel surfing and going, wow, there's Hurley, and it became global as well. And so we started to expand our designs outside of surfing. And so whether it was street art or whether it was music, and we were sitting in license meetings from a creative standpoint, getting beat up by Australia saying, hey, we're a surf company, we need to spend, for example, $500,000 on a surf contest in Huntington Beach. And we're going, well, that's really stupid because, $500,000 is a ton of money and can go a long way when you're working with bands, with MTV, and these people are our friends too, and surfers do a lot more than just surf. And so consequently, we became sort of at loggerheads with the Australian company from a creative standpoint. After 16 years, we decided not to renew the license agreement and started Hurley in an attempt to capture a more global or if you will, a more ecumenical market that, was
Mm.
broader and was, and that's why we started Hurley. It was an attempt to, I guess, be more mass market.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But yes, being more mass market, kind of broadening the appeal, but then also making it clear that there are other ways to kind of express that creativity beyond just the hardcore surfing, right? So getting into music, getting more into media, and so really a very kind of much more innovative approach to the way that creativity can reach other markets and other individuals. So, as we discussed in the lead up to this, a lot of what this class is about is learning about different individuals' perceptions of this term innovation, which is hugely overused right now. As you think about the industries that you've been involved with, what does that word really mean to you? How do you classify that?
Um, well, clearly, you can go to a dictionary definition, a new idea, creative thoughts, new imaginations in the form of device or method. And I've done a little bit of, uh, but to me, it really is, I guess, three things that it really falls into. One is it's a way of thinking, your gestalt, if you will. And the definition of gestalt is more like, holistic, point of view. And my undergraduate degree from UCI was in social ecology. So I tend to look at things in terms of an ecology. And so the innovation is a mindset. It should permeate every aspect of your DNA. It's your walk and your talk that's in sync. It's a rejection of the status quo. That would be the second, concept of innovation that I would think of. And then clearly another word that is way overused right now is disruption.
Mhm.
So and it's curious because it's an ability to see things that other people can't see. So it might be right in front of you and you don't even recognize it, but it's right there, but it's driven by a need as well. And the curious thing about it is often the innovators, the ones that truly come up with the idea aren't the ones who really profit on it. It's the people
Mhm.
that come along afterward that pick up on it and commercialize it or monetize it, if you will. So that's a curious conundrum, as well. And sorry, this is a really important concept to me. So yes, I do have notes that I did a fair bit when, I was asked to present here. So for me, out of the industry that I came in, there's sort of a weird, uh, I said there's a love of the ocean. And the ocean is incredibly dynamic and it's huge and it's powerful and it's very humbling. And so when you're in it as a surfer, even when you're a little kid, and you're surfing, you recognize early on that you adapt or die, that you better read the conditions really well. And again, I don't want to trivialize it, but I think there's a certain uniqueness, if you will, to surfers that you recognize that if you really do want to be in the water, that you better adapt and you better innovate, and it's constantly changes. And it also it's an environment where you're really hungry and you're street smart. And so there's this sort of mentality that surfers are cool and laid back and whatever. And that's not true at all. I mean, the reality is in this environment, it's social Darwinism on steroids. You got a limited resource, you've got a small amount of weight, and everybody paddles over one another. And so not only are you reading the conditions, but there's a lot of competitiveness, out in the water too. Now you can travel, you can live up here in Palos Verdes where you've got, a bit of localism going on, and so it tends to be a little less crowded than across the bay at Malibu. But nevertheless, it's incredibly competitive. So I was lucky, from the very early days, and both of my parents, loved the ocean and were surfers. In fact, that's where they met in Hawaii, because my mom was, in the 1940s going to the U of H, and she was riding a redwood surfboard and blah, blah, blah. So, I've been around it for a while, but I was lucky to witness, a lot of innovations in our industry. In the beginning, there were skateboards, and it was called sidewalk surfing. And so we used to build our own skateboard and take the metal skates off of, and the trucks, and then, nail them onto, plywood, and, ride them down the hills in our area. And then, it graduated to clay, and that was the innovation that came along, from steel to clay wheels. And then it went to urethane wheels in Dogtown from Venice, and that was like, wow, that was a huge, surfboards went from, obviously redwood to balsa wood to foam boards. And that was the advent of the aerospace industry being in Southern California. And so they had access to new materials. And then it went from longboards to shortboards. And so in the 1960s, I can remember you could get, longboards for a song because nobody wanted them anymore. And we would strip the fiberglass off it and reshape them, into shortboards. And so there was this innovation that was always pushing, the envelope, whether it was leashes. So in the beginning, nobody wore a leash. And if you did wear a leash, you were considered a kook, and they were considered kook cords. And I can remember Corky Carroll coming out with saying, while you're swimming, I'm trimming, and support of wearing a leash. And then the safety thing. And I can remember trying to make them out of rope, and then my leg would be like pulled, out of its socket. And then, it's like surgical tubing from, literally I go to a medical supply store, and then the board would like fly back at you a million miles an hour. And that's how lost his eye, and Derek Hine lost his eye because of an accident. And then you ran, rope down the center of the surgical tubing to limit the stretch. Surfboard fins. I can remember shaping my own surfboard fins and making them, for flex. So you're constantly chasing, when you talk about innovation, and I granted, surfing, skateboarding, it's not like, the end all. It's not like Steve Jobs. It's not like, but, it was driven by a love of fun, I'm sort of embarrassed to even be asked to be involved in this interview, because it's just surfing after all. It's just skateboarding, but it was an awful lot of fun. And then, you talk about wetsuits, in the beginning, there weren't any wetsuits, and then when they came along, they fit really bad. And I can remember a fire ring at Dockweiler Beach. There was a jetty called D&W. And so you'd sit around the fire ring, after you get out of the water, and you'd be like freezing your butt off, and then wetsuits got better and better until finally, the advent of the zipperless wetsuit came along. And the zipperless wetsuit came out of when I was going to Japan, and my wife was in charge of Billabong, Japan. And we were saying, gee, there's this new type of wetsuit that the Japanese are wearing that are zipperless. And so Cindy brought it back, and ironically, it was called Rash. That was the name of the wetsuit brand. And so, we took it and tweaked it and changed it. And again, that's an example of, we weren't the innovators of it, but we took this design, we recognized that it was, and we got the patent for it. And then we came up with the first zipperless wetsuit, and there were no leaks, and they fit incredibly well. And then everybody started knocking us off, even though we had the patent, of course. And these were friends like Quicksilver, who, Bob McKnight, we would surf out in the water together, and he'd be going, I got a cease and desist letter from your attorney about infringing on your patent on the zipperless wetsuit. We're going, oh man, this is just like a nightmare. Business is business. So we turned over the patent to the National Scholastic Surfing Association, projected the income stream, and then took it as a tax deduction, donated the patent to the NSSA. And if the other, people in the surf industry didn't, participate, then they would be considered the curmudgeon of the bad guys because they didn't support the NSSA. And, so there's but again, I was so out of my league when I got into the fashion industry, it's like embarrassing. And I knew that I had to come up to speed really fast. And so I had, Australia couldn't keep up with our production. And so Cindy had an auntie who was in charge of a sewing contractor floor here in Los Angeles. So Auntie Sumi introduced me to this old Jewish garmento gentleman who took me under his wing and mentored me. And if it wasn't for Harold, I wouldn't, we wouldn't be anywhere. But I also realized, gee, there's so much innovation coming through in the garment industry. Help. And so there was a show in Atlanta called the Bobbin Show. So here I am, the dumb surfer in board shorts and flip-flops, in a t-shirt walking the Bobbin Show in Atlanta, year in and year out, collecting brochures and sitting in seminars, and nobody from the surf industry. I was completely and totally the only one at the Bobbin Show. And there was another trade show called the JIAM show in Japan, the Japan Industrial Apparel Manufacturers. And I would go to that show, every year as well, and walk around and try to figure out, gee, how is robotics entering into the equation? How are CAD systems entering in? What about IT apparel specific platforms? And so we really pushed the envelope in terms of embracing innovation to keep our production in the United States as long as possible. And a lot of that allowed us to control our inventory really, really tight when people were moving production over to Asia because of pricing. I was able to keep my production in downtown Los Angeles and in Orange County because of an acknowledgement, hey, I'm completely out of my league here. I'm out of my water. I need help. And so I was embracing it, and it allowed us to really run an efficient organization in many respects. We had a CFO that was a partner, Mike Oxner, who from day one, this was pre-Apple days, that got on Capro computers. I don't know if you remember Capro, but, so when actually, we were audited every single year by Moss Adams, who was our accounting firm, and they were always tripping, going, gee, your books are like, they're so incredibly clean. But a lot of that was an acknowledgement of, hey, we're out of our waters. We need to embrace innovation, and we need to be at the forefront, of this. As a last example that's coming along here with innovation out of the industry is a new sport, a new way of riding waves called foiling, Foiling. And it's actually, a little hydroplane. It's not little, it's actually about 48 inches long, and it's a wing that goes on the bottom of a board, and it's like a flying guillotine. And it's really dangerous. But when you see these guys foiling, the innovation is just so beautiful to watch, because it's literally they're flying over the waves, and they're gliding. But the learning curve with it is incredibly steep, and there's not very many people that are doing it. But when you watch it, it's really fun. There's sort of a little bit of a glimpse into the innovation that I've been privileged to be a part of, either indirectly or directly, through many years of being in the surf and skateboard industry.
Oh, that's awesome. Those are some remarkable stories, and I love also how you talked about the march forward. For example, how the aerospace industry really made material availability something that could transform the landscape. So those kind of couplings of industries, I think, is also an interesting angle in terms of when an innovation is when the right time is for a particular innovation, right? Because sometimes it's easy to get out ahead of things and be quote unquote too early with an idea. So if we switch gears a little bit, and you already brought up in some of the stories you shared when things did not go perfectly well, right? But failure is a big part of this. Understanding how to recover from something that didn't work well. And so, in your mind, what maybe is the one or two most important failures that you've experienced in your career that propelled you forward, in the aftermath?
Where do I start? I mean, seriously, when I look back on it, Andrew, it's embarrassing with how much failure that should have put us under. I can remember one inventory buy that we made on some fleece. I still remember the style number, K2 K2 and K3 tees, and they were this interchangeable fleece that were really brightly colored and super cool. But we just bought way. That should have put us under. I opened this by talking about how innovation is a mindset, that it's a gestalt, it's a holistic attitude, it's an ecology. There's a lot of truth to that adage, what makes us breaks us. And I alluded to how timing is everything. It's a lot better to be lucky than smart. I think I pondered this a lot, and I actually talked to my wife, Cindy, because like I said, she was, on point for, Billabong Japan. And I said, what do you think, Cindy? What was our biggest failure? Where do we start? I mean, there's so much, but, and we both came to the same conclusion that our biggest failure was, it was almost too easy for us, Andrew, meaning the timing was so good and the market was so ripe that we almost couldn't fail. So there was a sense of complacency, if you will, that came into the organization that ultimately really came back to haunt us. And I think it haunts the entire, industry to this very day. You had Gidget, you had Elvis making, the movies about, Hawaii. You had Endless Summer, you have the surf music, Dick Dale, you had Beach Boys on the radio, and so, it was just this pop. And then when the big boxes came in, like Tilly's and PacSun, and like I alluded to earlier, we had the secondary and tertiary markets that were fashion driven. Well, now we were in waters that really we didn't know about. And we thought that, oh yeah, we're like the bomb, we're super cool. And the biggest failure in our minds is we drank our own Kool-Aid, that we believed the hype, that we thought that we were, super cool. And then when things started to change, and here we are, we're surfers, we know that conditions change, we still were like believing the hype. So I can remember like clearly night and day, when I started to go to Japan and, go to the JIM shows, and then Cindy was in charge of Billabong Japan, and I was buying my fabric from Ito2, which was a really large Japanese trading company. And so, I would spend a lot of time doing market research in Japan, and I started to bring back samples from a company called Uniqlo, Uniqlo, which is really popular today. And I love Uniqlo, and this was like in the early 90s, and I'm bringing it back and I'm showing my designers, and I'm saying, check out the quality of this, check out the fabric, check out the sewing construction, check out the colors. I mean, this is so on point. This is the future. This is what we're contending with. This is like if you're out in the water and you're surfing, all of a sudden the waters are becoming a lot more crowded. And then you got H&M coming on the scene, and then you got Zara coming on the scene. And then, we started to sell, if you will, the sizzle and not necessarily the bacon. We were saying, yeah, but we're cool, we're surfers, and like, we're selling the lifestyle, of course, but product. And this is something that you've got a front row seat here. You've seen skateboards change. You've seen leashes come into the market. You've seen wetsuits come into the market. I had a front row seat to this. And I'm trying to tell our designers, and I'm trying to tell our other partners, hey, this is, and I can remember like bringing back samples from Japan, and literally they'd be in the same bags for like a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks. And I'm taking them out going, check out this woven shirt, like check out like the fabric of it. And you know what? This is selling for $19.99, and we're trying to sell, our woven shirts for like $40 or $50. We're going to get our asses, handed to us. This is the landscape is really changing. And I can remember being in license meetings, in Australia, and saying the same thing. And yet, nope, you got to do a surf contest down at, Huntington Beach, the U.S. Open. And I'm going, to replace the OP Pro, so there's a huge failure here, Andrew, in not staying hungry or believing the hype. And I knew that things when we started Hurley, and the intention was to embrace this larger market, but then being in a design meeting and somebody who was a key person in design was saying, all I need to do is stand outside the AMC theater in Mission Viejo and I can get all the inspiration that I want for design. And this person was really instrumental in marketing as well. And I'm going, no, it's a global market now. It's huge. It's worldwide, and we can't put the blinders on here. Orange County is not the center of the universe here. We need to be traveling to Berlin. We need to be traveling to Paris. We need to be traveling to Milan. We need to be going to Tokyo, of course, because Tokyo has everything happening. All you need to go is to the Isetan, in Shinjuku, and they've got every single clothing brand on the face of the earth that's getting any sort of. You need to go to Hong Kong. You need to go to Dubai. All of these influences are coming into the market. But no, it's Orange County, and Orange County is the center of the universe, and that's just not the way it is. And it is curious that after Nike acquired Hurley in 2002, one of the biggest selling points was the fact that there was this lip service now being paid that we're Hurley International. But again, the walk wasn't in sync with the talk, because Nike realized after 2 or 3 years, hey, they're a surf company. And really that's all that they want to do. That's all that they're interested in. Now, certainly I was not solely interested in just being a surf company. And so there was a bit of we got into a creative disagreement with Billabong, and that's why we left to start Hurley. That's why I decided to retire as well. And that was a big failure on my part. I take that personally. Maybe I should have fought harder, but that's a hard one. Supreme. I can remember being, in Dakayama in Tokyo, and looking at this long lines out of this store, and I go, what the heck? What store is this? And this was like in 1999 or 2000, and I go, Supreme, what, and I walked into, the store after getting, looked up and down, like not being cool, because there's a Japanese word, saying Dasai. And so, I was a gaijin, a foreigner that was just obviously on market research, checking out what's going on. So I'm bringing back Supreme samples. And it was again, falling on deaf ears where people are going, well, what's Supreme? And what it's incredibly competitive marketplace, the apparel industry. It's really entertainment. It's not a basic necessity. When you're looking at what's a basic necessity, students? Oh, it's food, shelter, and clothing. Okay, well, you know what? If I give you $1,000 and I tell you to go to, Maxfield's in Beverly Hills, off Beverly, and try to buy some, you're going to say, hey, you didn't give me enough because, for example, I love a clothing line called Fear of God. Well, I went to look at a flannel shirt that they had, and I go, oh, I want to get this. And I look at the price tag, $1,200 for a flannel shirt. But if I gave you that $1,000 and I said, okay, go to Salvation Army, I mean, you couldn't spend the $1,000 because you would end up with so much clothing. So if it's really a basic necessity, but it's not. It's entertainment, and so I totally get that you need the sizzle and you need the bacon. You absolutely have to have the promotion and the marketing and the lifestyle component. I can think of many a company where they have amazing product, but they didn't have good promotion and marketing, and so it's like a tree falling in the forest with no one to hear it. Does it make a sound? No. But ultimately, in my mind, I'm a product person. I'm in love with product. I'm in love with innovation, and that was, I'm looking back, huge failure, on our part, on my part. We drank our own Kool-Aid. Orange County is not the center of the universe. It's a global reality. An interesting little sidebar note here is VF Corporation. VF Corporation purchased Vans almost at the same time that Nike acquired Hurley. Okay? And our revenue dollars were pretty close to one another. VF, when they acquired Vans, was merciless in terms of pushing the envelope and forcing people over there to stay hungry. And they were merciless in terms of firing people that they felt like weren't in sync with the vision of Vans. And so, there's a store that opened up in the Arts District in downtown LA called Dover Street Market. And I've been following Dover Street Market for years and years. When I would be in London, I'd make sure to go there, in Tokyo to go there. It's affiliated with Comme des Garçons. And who's in there? Vans. I mean, Vans is one of the brands that's in Dover Street Market. And that's because the designs are innovative. That's because they do wonderful collaborations with artists. They get it. VF Corporation encouraged and pushed Vans into that niche. That was the vision that Nike had for Hurley, and why Nike tolerated or enabled, Hurley to retreat back into the surf market. Maybe it was just an acknowledgement of it is what it is. But last November, after many years, we were acquired in 2002. So in 2019, 16, 17 years, Nike divested itself of Hurley. And it's a pity, because it landed into a pretty rapacious Garmento, company that's going to, well, they already have made licensing deals, and all they're doing now is trying to bank on the name, but the product is extremely mass market and certainly wouldn't be considered innovative by any stretch. So I'm only bringing this up as an example. You talk about failure, but what VF did with Vans was amazing, and what Nike and Hurley did is, it's certainly not a highlight of my career, Andrew, where I look back and go, gee, I'm really proud of, where Hurley is now. I'm not. So there you have it. I'm being brutally honest and frank here, and transparent.
Well, I appreciate that, because it is, I think it's, you clearly recognize that making sure people understand, where those hiccups are. Sometimes we recover from them, sometimes we don't, and sometimes they only look like hiccups in retrospect. And so, failure for me is, it's very important to be very, very honest, and we don't really understand the true impact or the true origin sometimes of failures unless we're brutally honest with ourselves. So I really appreciate you sharing those stories. We're wrapping up, Joe. Do you have any last tidbits that you'd like to share with the students?
I do. You had, as a last bullet point down, how has failure allowed me to be a stronger innovator? And so it's very important to end this on a positive, on a hopeful note, Andrew. There's not gloom and doom right now. There are so many opportunities, and it's such a stupid, trite cliche that the Chinese character, for crisis is the same one for opportunity. That's dumb, but it's really true. So, in my retirement now, so I'm guest lecturing at Stanford University at the engineering school for the senior capstone project. And again, this is another dumb example. It's like in the class, that's for Snapchat came out of. And, Evan Spiegel, if I had been, asked to like invest money, I would have gone the project. But it just goes to show you, poor stupid guy, you never can tell what the public will buy. It's that line from the Lorax. On the boards, that I sit on a number of them, and they're in various industries. I tell them at the outset, if you want me on the board, I'm not going to be a yes man. I'm not going to go along to get along. Innovation, honesty go hand in hand, and you have to be brutally honest, and you cannot suffer mediocrity. You can't suffer nepotism. You can't suffer. I mean, you just constantly have to push the envelope, and it doesn't mean you're a jerk like Steve Jobs. Hopefully there's a middle ground here. But the Bible says something about you can't be lukewarm. You're either hot or cold, or I'll spit you out of my mouth. So you just this is where innovation thrives. And so with the boards that I'm on, I'm constantly questioning. I'm constantly, thinking, okay, what's wrong with this picture? How can we do it better? And it's beautiful as a board member. I'm asked to consult. I don't do consulting because they can ignore, if you're a consultant. And more often than not, if you're paid as a consultant, they want to hear what you want to tell them. But as a board member, you have a lot of power. And with that power also comes responsibility and fiduciary exposure. But, all the boards that I'm on, I tell them, I'm not a yes man. I'm going to be, because innovation to me, pushing the envelope, staying competitive is extremely important. And there has to be a level of commitment, even down to where, you burn your own ships. And, that's not an urban myth. That's something that, truly, if you look back in history, at least Western history, there's also examples in Eastern history, but it started off with Alexander the Great, who literally burned the ships, when they landed at the Dardanelles, to force the troops, hey, you have no other option, charge, take ahead. Julius Caesar did the same thing. Cortez did the same thing. And when I read that about Cortez, I'm going, oh, come on. How did he get back? You know what? He never did come back. He died in, the quote unquote New World. And obviously, those are examples of warfare and colonialization, and I don't want to tread on territory where it appears that I'm not woke, but it demonstrates the level of commitment that you need to have. And this has to be conveyed when I'm on a board. I'm merciless, when it comes to pushing the envelope and staying hungry and remaining, competitive, direct to consumer, that offers look at in this pandemic right now, what companies have succeeded, those companies that have embraced and totally laid the groundwork for direct to consumer. And so when I was asked, actually long before the company that is a women's clothing line, Doan, that I'm really proud of what they're doing, and the woman who started it was a senior head designer at a company in downtown LA called Joie, and then she started Doan. And when they were asking my advice, I said, hey, don't even bother with wholesale. It's a dead, a dead area. You've got to embrace direct to consumer, period. If you are going to go into wholesale, it's for marketing and promotion purposes only. So like if, you're not going to sell a whole lot of product if you're in at a Dover Street Market, but it's going to be great for promotion and marketing. But your numbers are going to come from direct to consumer. So don't do business with Nordstrom's. Don't do business, Bloomingdale's. And sure enough, in the pandemic, and these shutdowns, and yet they're doing quite well. It's the same with a completely opposite board I'm on called Packard, and then they're heating and air conditioning. And in the beginning, when I got on the board, there was sort of this, direct to consumer e-commerce, and yet there was a company out of New York, a wholesale channel called The Boys, and they were very much embracing direct-to-consumer. I said, this is a customer we really need to go after because this is the future. And in the top 10 accounts for Packard, the boys is certainly residing in one of them now. And so, you have to have your eyes wide open. You can't drink the Kool-Aid. You can't be complacent. You can't think you know it all. You constantly have to realize, hey, I've got a lot to learn here. And it's one of the reasons why even I like to come onto campus at Chapman and teach over at Dean Turk's, classes, because they teach me as much as hopefully I'm passing the baton on to them. So that's my parting words here. It's just stay hungry, stay competitive, and just don't drink the Kool-Aid. Don't get complacent.
Those are important words, and I also greatly appreciate the commentary on you can hopefully do that without being, shall we say, a horrible person, right? That you.
Yeah. There's
right.
another thing. There's a lot of saying that has a lot of wisdom, and like, what profit a man if he gains the whole world and loses his soul in the end?
Yep. Yeah. The adage that I like to live by, and you can Google this after we're done. I won't bore you with the details. But I like to say we should all be living by Wheaton's law. And I'll leave you with that. You can check that out on Google afterwards. Joe, this has been a real pleasure. I really do appreciate you joining us today. I've learned a ton. I know the students are going to learn a ton when they see this in the fall. And so, again, thank you for taking the time to be on Innovation Out of Failure.
You're welcome. And best of luck to all your students. And thank you for giving me the opportunity to pass the baton on.
I want to thank Joe for taking the time to join us and sharing some really amazing stories, and also thanks to you for listening to Innovation Out of Failure. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and I hope you'll check out all of my other interviews with amazing innovators. Once again, my name is Andrew Lyon. Thank you for listening.